When the Chicago Bulls initially acquired DeMar DeRozan, this of course after the Bulls traded for Nikola Vucevic to put both of these guys alongside Zach Lavine, the national media clowned the Bulls front office for making these moves because with three of their best players being all dominant offensively while all of them being poor or net negative players on the defensive end, the thought was that the Bulls would be terrible on defense. Never mind the fact that they also acquired Lonzo Ball and Alex Caruso that same offseason, two of the more elite defenders in the NBA. But from most people's perspectives, the Bulls, while they would have a high-level offensive team, they would be downright garbage on the defensive end. But despite the fact that the Bulls lost Lonzo Ball, which severely impacted their defense in the 21-22 season, going from a top 15 team on defense to 22nd in defensive rating, in the following season the Bulls somehow managed to finish with the 5th best defensive rating in the NBA, 7th in opponents' points per game. And while the Bulls struggled last season going 40-42 and missing the playoffs, it was shocking to see this was more of a product on their offense being subpar despite having some of the best offensive players in the game. But while the Bulls have struggled and continue to struggle going into this season playing as a team on offense, one thing the Bulls have done well at, as a team, even for those that aren't as gifted offensively, is they play defense by committee. Not all the time, of course, they've had their moments of bad possessions on defense, and this season is no exception to that. But when the Bulls need to step up, get stops, they play some of the best lockdown defense in the NBA, especially in late game moments, which has enabled them to slowly turn their season around in putting together consistent winning. How good, you might ask? Well, let's talk about it. But speaking of defense, how well do you think the Bulls will do on that end of the floor as we head into the back half of the season? Make some predictions on where you think the Bulls might finish this season in defensive rating, for which they currently rank 15th. And speaking of predictions, you guys know I have to find a smooth way to bring in the sponsor of the channel, Underdog Fantasy. People always ask me, hey, what's a way I can support the channel? Because I've always said I'll never ask you guys for money. I don't do the whole memberships or Patreon thing. I think it's weird. But one way to support the channel is checking out Underdog Fantasy, and you'll even get some free money for yourselves. For those that aren't familiar with Underdog, let me tell you about my personal favorite that I use on the app, NBA Pick'ems. With Pick'ems, you can pick higher or lower on most players' stats and win money based on the ones you get right. You pick higher or lower, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night if you do 5 Pick'ems and you get them all right. If you think Vucevic is going to score more than 16 points against the Grizzlies, which will probably be the case considering the Grizzlies are so short-handed, select higher and you can win some money. And guys, they're offering viewers of this channel an exclusive offer. If you use the promo code BULLCENTRAL, you'll get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Who doesn't want free money? It's really that easy. Like I said, it's a great way to support the channel. I'll leave a link to the site and the code in the description if you're interested, and let me know what picks you guys end up making. Now, when talking about the Bulls defense, I do want to be clear that the Bulls overall, their defense this season has not been great. It's not like it was last season. And as I mentioned, they're currently 15th in the league in defensive rating. They're one of the worst teams in the league when it comes to three-pointers allowed by their opponent, at second to the last in the NBA. They're 23rd in defensive rebounding. They're not even in the top 10 in blocks and steals. Like, their defense could certainly be better. But for better or for worse, and some might find this more frustrating than anything because you would hope the Bulls could play defense like this all the time and for the whole 48 minutes, but when it comes to closing minutes or clutch time, what the league defines as a game within 5 points with 5 minutes to go, the Bulls are one of the most elite defensive teams in the league. And I shouldn't even say elite, they are the best defensive team in the entire NBA in those clutch moments by defensive rating. For a team that is in the middle of the pack at 15th in overall defense, they're number 1 on that end of the floor in the clutch. Now, Casey Johnson of NBC Sports Chicago delved into this a bit further, and I wanted to touch on it more to give it a bit more context, but I'm sure some will say, well, whatever, you're cherry picking a small portion of a game on a small sample size of minutes to talk about the Bulls and how good their defense has been. It's like when you hear those ridiculous stats of so-and-so became the first player to score 35-plus points, 4-plus rebounds, 8-plus assists in only 27 minutes of play on the road in the month of December in NBA history. I'm making it up, obviously, but you get my point. Some obscure stat line that makes it seem like some incredible feat, but then you put all these parameters around it and it doesn't sound so great. But for the Bulls, while clutch minutes might not seem like a lot, you might be surprised to know that the Bulls have logged the most clutch minutes in the league at 101 minutes. Or maybe you're not surprised because I feel like we frequently talk about how the Bulls are giving us heart attacks and taking years off our lives with how close some of these games are. But regardless, the Bulls lead the NBA in most clutch minutes and clutch games played to date. and they're the #1 defensive rating team in the league in that time frame. And by a wide margin, I might add. As Casey mentioned, the team in second, which doesn't have as many clutch minutes as the Bulls do, the Orlando Magic, they have a defensive rating of 98.8, while the Bulls have a defensive rating of 96.2. A big difference when you consider the league average and defensive rating is around 114. Now, the Bulls are 13-9 overall in clutch games, which isn't amazing, but more recently, they have been much more efficient in the clutch and closing out games. Going 11-3 in their last 14 clutch games, their defensive ratings in just those games is even better, below 95, which is insane when you factor in how good offenses are in today's NBA and how rare it is to get anything below 100 in defensive rating. I do think it's also worth noting that while the Bulls' overall defensive rating for the year is at 15th in the league, you also have to remember the Bulls played very poorly to start off the season and have been trying to make up ground ever since. In just the last 15 games alone, they're actually 7th in the league on defense and top 5 on defense in their last 10 games. But what gets me is just how good the Bulls have looked on defense in the final minutes of a game. As I said, it's almost kind of annoying because you would like to see them play that way the whole game, not get lazy, not get complacent thinking they can just take some possessions off. But for the Bulls, while last season and the year before that they won a lot of close games because of their heroics on offense, mainly coming from DeMar DeRozan, they're winning clutch games this year because of their defense. I mean, I look at the 2 overtime games against the Hornets and the Rockets where both of those teams couldn't buy a basket in the final 2 minutes of overtime, or the game against the Spurs, which was way too close for comfort, but in the final 3 minutes, the Spurs couldn't get a field goal. And the biggest factor in all this, well, yes, is Alex Caruso, who is just incredible in closing out games on defense, but it's more so the fact that the Bulls play defense as a team in those final minutes of close games. Because the Bulls' closing lineup doesn't feature the best defenders. Yes, Alex Caruso is going to be out there closing games, but then you have Coby White, Zach Lavine, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, all players who are not known for their defensive abilities. But in those moments, all of those guys have stepped up. The communication is on point. There are very few mental lapses and miscues when it comes to navigating screens and reading switches. They play great on-ball defense when a player is going isolation. I mean, I hate to use the cliche word, but they're playing for each other on that end of the floor in close games. Yes, we would like to see more of that on offense, which the Bulls are getting better at to an extent, but given the fact the Bulls have played a lot of close games last season, they played a lot of close games this season. Last season, the Bulls lost 17 games by 5 points or less. I know I say that all the time, but while we've been focusing so much attention on the offensive end of the ball in those close games, saying that if only they just had some better shooters for those minutes, but if the Bulls can continue to keep up this level of effort on defense, they can win most of their close games and slowly work their way back up in the standings. Now, I hope anyway that we just won't see as many close games and the Bulls can start winning games a little more handily, especially against teams that they're supposed to beat, just for my sanity and stress levels. But as long as this team keeps winning, I'll be golden. Let me know what you guys think. Are you surprised by some of these clutch numbers? I'll also leave a link to the Casey Johnson article below if you're interested. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.